Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are joining us from around the world. We're very happy to have you for the third of our 4 webinars on proposed headline indicators for the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, which are being organised by the United Nations Environment Programme, World Conservation Monitoring Centre, UNEP-WCMC, and the Secretariat to the Convention on Biological Diversity. My name is Philip Bubb, and I'm going to be chairing these sessions. And I'd also like to say a very happy International Women's Day today. Before I go further, just like to do some housekeeping. So we would like to notify you that today's session will be recorded and made available on YouTube. And your microphone will be muted and your camera will be off during the webinar. And if you would like to comment, please use the chat function. And if you would like to ask a question, then please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen in Zoom. If you have a question for a particular speaker, please do say that. And we will have a question and answer session at the end. We might have some time for questions in between, but probably at the end. And if you have any technical issues, please send a direct message to technical support at Laura Mack in the chat. Thank you. Next slide, please. So these webinars, as I said, hosted by the Secretariat of the Convention on Biodiversity and UNEP-WCMC, and their aim is to introduce the metadata for the headline indicators that have been proposed in the first draft monitoring framework for the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. When we say metadata, it means data about data. It's a description about the indicators. And the presentations are by the organizations that provide or are developing the proposed headline indicators. Next slide, please. And so this is the third of 4 webinars. The last one will be tomorrow. And our aim is to help CBD parties and other actors involved in the development of these frameworks to understand the proposed headline indicators, what they measure in relation to the goals and targets, their methods and data sources, and the potential national level use, their availability. Some are ready now, some are still in development. And for you to get to know who produces the indicators. Please note that in these webinars, not all the headline indicators will be presented due to limited availability of speakers to present them, and also because some of the indicators are still at a conceptual stage. Next slide, please. So this webinar is part of the pathway to COP15 later this year. We're at the first dot on the left here now, where we're presenting and giving questions and answers opportunity on the information about the proposed headline indicators. And that information will also be available in an information document to Substar 24 shortly. We'll be hearing a little bit about the summary results of that in this webinar. That information document will be available for peer review to contribute to the discussions on the monitoring framework at Substar 24. And then in April, a technical indicator meeting is being organised to discuss the suitability and availability of indicators and to help make some suggestions which will go into the background papers developed after Substar 24 to support COP15. Next slide, please. So this information document that UNEP-WCMC is preparing with the Secretariat of the CBD has information about the headline indicators, but it doesn't cover their suitability as such, and that's also not what we're presenting about in these webinars. Suitability in terms of how much the indicator is suitable for measuring progress towards the goals and targets. That will be looked at later through the peer review and at Substar 24. But there will be this expert meeting in April, organised by UNEP-WCMC with the Secretariat of the CBD and Biodiversity Indicators Partnership to look at that. And those, as I said, will go into an information document for COP15. Next slide, please. So this is our program for today, for today's session, 90 minutes. And a minute after the introduction, I'm going to invite the Substar chair, Jessica Benitez, to give us a little introduction to the draft monitoring framework and how it's part of the negotiation process and where these webinars fit in. And then we'll be having presentations on these indicators that are listed here, perhaps not quite in this exact order, but we will be covering a lot today. And then we will have time at the end for some questions and answers. And please post your questions in the webinar Q&A function, saying who they're for if you can. And some of the speakers may reply to those during in the Q&A facility, but we'll also take them at the end. And then we'll have some closing remarks. Next slide, please. So how we will run the sessions is that each presentation, well, I think it's that there'll be 6 to 8, some of them will be a bit longer today, some of the sessions 10 minutes maybe. And as I say, please use the Q&A function. And if you have additional queries after the webinar that you'd like to make directly to the indicators providers, please do approach them. Or you can do that via this UNEP-WCMC helpdesk email there, info@indicators.net. And just to remind you that these webinars are being recorded and will be available on YouTube, where translation into other languages is available. So next slide, please. I would like to invite Jessica Benitez, please, to give us some more introduction to the framework and the monitoring framework and how these webinars are part of that.
Thank you, Phil. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to this third technical webinar on indicators organized to support information sharing around the monitoring framework for the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. A draft monitoring framework was prepared prior to part 1 of the 24 meeting of SubStat as document SubStat 24.3.1. And an updated version of this document is currently online as a non-paper for SubStat 24 part 2 that will start next week. This non-paper will serve as the starting point for the negotiations that we will have on the monitoring framework in the upcoming weeks. All of the indicators presented in this webinar are currently included as headline indicators in the draft monitoring framework. I've been working with the Secretariat and also with UNEP-WCMC to ensure that parties have information on the technical specificities of existing indicator methodologies. These webinars are presenting indicators that are already at an advanced stage of development. For indicators that are not in a such advanced stage of development, these will need to be developed further if they are maintained in the monitoring framework, but a technical presentation such as the one today is not possible for these indicators. Additionally, the selection of which indicators has been presented on different days has been largely based on the availability of different global experts. I would like to thank all the experts who have agreed to present these indicators, and I apologize to participants that we were not able to group the indicators by goal or target due to the availability of the experts. As Phil shown, today we're going to have discussions on goal A and B and also on targets 9, 11, and 14. A lot to be with accounting and economic elements. So today is going to be also an interesting session. In terms of how these webinars relate to the upcoming SubStat meeting, during the SubStat, I will reestablish a contact group on the monitoring framework. This group will be chaired by Andy Stott and from the UK and Alfred Oteng-Jibois from Ghana. This group will be expected to assess the suitability of specific headline indicators vis-a-vis the post-2020 global biodiversity framework, including the national and global applicability of these indicators. I hope that this webinar will provide information which can inform the discussion in terms of the indicators that are being presented today. I don't want to take up too much of your time, as I know we have a very busy agenda today. Thank you to WCMC and the CBD Secretariat for supporting the development of these webinars, and to all of you for joining us today. Thank you very much and good luck.
Thank you very much, Ezekiel. Great. So next, I would like to ask my colleague, Sarah Ivory from UNEP-WCMC, to give us an overview of the work that we've been doing with the CBD Secretariat on compiling metadata for the proposed indicators in the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, and which will go into this information document. Sarah.
Hi, everybody, and thanks, Philip. As Philip said, I'm just going to give a brief overview of the work that we've been doing here at UNEP-WCMC to try and bring together the metadata for each of the proposed headline indicators for the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Next slide, please. So the first thing that we did was to produce a metadata template, which is a form that asks for certain information about the indicator, but importantly, it doesn't ask for the data or for the indicator itself. We developed this loosely based on the template that's used for the Sustainable Development Goal indicators. We've adapted it to fit our specific purpose here, which is to provide information to aid the selection of the indicators for the monitoring framework. We then sent this template to each of the organisations responsible for providing or developing the proposed headline indicators in the current draft monitoring framework for them to fill out and then return to us. Next slide, please. To briefly recap, the proposed selection criteria for the headline indicators are that the data in the metadata relating to the indicator are or will be publicly available. The methodology is published in a peer-reviewed academic journal or has gone through a scientific peer review process. Headline indicators should be regularly updated with a time lag of less than 5 years between updates, which hopefully would mean there should be 3 data points by 2030 for most indicators. There are existing mechanisms for maintaining the indicator, which will help to ensure its continued production for this purpose. Headline indicators should constitute one of the main components of national reports and should support national planning processes. And finally, headline indicator methodologies should be agreed by parties and calculated based on national data provided and or validated by parties. Next slide, please. So just to provide a brief summary of what we've found so far, we've received full metadata sheets for 26 of the 39 proposed headline indicators. The remaining indicators are at such an early stage of development, or for some are still very much in a conceptual stage, that we've actually asked for a shortened version of the template, which provides more reduced information, but also more specific information about the current level of development and the proposed timetable, among other things. As you can see from the pie chart here, we currently have the same number of indicators that are available today as we do that are at a very early stage. So the blue part of the pie chart indicates those that are currently available for use, which is around 40%. The grey section shows those that are under active development, meaning that they're expected to be ready for use within 2 years, which is around 20%. And then the orange section represents those that are at this very early or conceptual stage and need development, which is also around 40%. The box to the right there is probably fairly meaningless unless you are very familiar with the numbers assigned to each indicator, but we just wanted to use it to highlight that some goals and targets are much better covered than others by available indicators, and notably indicators relating to Goal D, and targets 19 to 21 in particular need some work. We also looked at the scale of the indicator, whether it's produced at the global level or compiled using national data, and also whether a national methodology is available for use by parties. Next slide, please. As part of the metadata sheets, we looked at whether indicators are adopted for use under other multilateral environmental agreements and processes. And we found that 18 of the proposed headline indicators are said to be used for measuring progress towards other MEAs and processes. 15 are reported to be adopted for measuring progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals. 5 indicators are said to be used in assessments for the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, IPBES. 2 indicators are also cited in the Strategic Plan for Migratory Species under the Convention on Migratory Species, and 5 proposed indicators are peer-reviewed by the Biodiversity Indicators Partnership. Next slide, please. It's also really important to highlight what we did not consider under this piece of work. And primarily, we didn't assess the suitability of the proposed indicators for measuring progress towards the relevant draft goal or target of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. This is something that will be covered through a peer review process and also it's an expert workshop to be held after SBDA 24. Equally, we didn't provide an assessment of the rationale for the indicator, the methodology, the data, the suitability and accessibility of the indicator output, the geographical range, and the proposed time series. Next slide, please. So the next step is that an information document bringing together all the metadata sheets for each of the proposed headline indicators will be made available to SBDA 24 and will also undergo peer review by both parties and experts. The metadata sheet template will also be available for peer review itself. And following SBDA 24, there will be an in-person indicator expert meeting to discuss the outcomes from SBDA and also the results of the peer review process. And based on this, a document will be provided to COP15. Next slide, please. Finally, I just wanted to end by highlighting a couple of resources, namely the website www.post-2020indicators.org, where these metadata sheets will be made available. And there's also an info document for SBDA, which the number you can see on the screen, which provides information about the criteria that may be helpful for indicator selection. And finally, we encourage you to contact us at info@bipindicators.net for any further information, and in particular for any parties to please let us know if there's any other information you would like to have about the indicators, which would help inform the discussions. Thank you very much, and back to Philip.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Could I have the next slide, please? Thank you. Very good. So in a moment, I'm going to invite Alessandra Alfieri from the UN Statistics Division to give some general remarks to introduce the indicators that we have today. Because all of the indicators, the work that you're going to be hearing about today have been brought together through the UN Statistics Division and their partners. So we're going to be hearing from, I think it's 5 speakers associated with the UN Statistics Division, these indicators. I would like to ask the speakers as well, when they just to introduce themselves, and I will be aiming to keep time. So I may be asking the speakers to give them 2 minutes notice to conclude their session, just so that we have time for questions and answers at the end. And please do use the chat function to make comments, and the Q&A buttons as well, to post your questions as they occur to you during the presentations, so that we can take them at the end. Thank you. Okay, I'd like to ask Alessandra if she could give us about 3 minutes of general remarks, introductions to the indicators and the work that we're about to hear today.
Thank you, Philip, and thank you to the organizer for an opportunity to just give a few remarks on this. We just actually came out from the Statistical Commission last week, in which reaffirmed their readiness and their interest in engaging into supporting the development of the indicator in support of the global biodiversity framework. As you know, I mean, today we will be discussing indicators derived from the system of environmental economic accounting, which was adopted by the as a statistical standard by the UN Statistical Commission, which is basically the highest body which maintains a statistical standard and includes the chief statisticians from the whole world. We also had a side event at the Statistical Commission to basically inform the statistical community of the post-2020 global biodiversity framework, and a discussion on the role of the statistical offices in the implementation and the development of this framework. So, I mean, I think that we'll see today also from the presentation that a lot of the information that is needed for the indicator is actually maintained by the national statistical offices. So they have quite an important role to play. And the objective here is really to try to institutionalize the compilation of these accounts and of the indicators within the national statistical system, so that this become kind of produced on a regular basis, and they are part of the regular statistical production process. The statistical offices, of course, would have to work in close collaboration with the CBD focal points and with the institution across the countries, and academia, the scientific community, and so on. And this is a kind of fits within the new role that the national statistical offices are now taking, which is more data steward. So where not all the data and statistics are actually generated within the national statistical offices, but the national statistical offices has a role as integrator in bringing together all this information and ensuring that these are produced on a regular basis following the principles of official statistics. So, I mean, this is just, I wanted to say that the statistical community is very much looking forward to participate in this process and supporting it. Thank you very much, Philip.
Thank you very much, Alessandra. It's great. Certainly, the statistics community are going to be a vital central role to the development and implementation of the monitoring framework. So I'd like to invite our next speaker, please. Can I have the next slide? So I'd like to invite Julian Chow from UN Statistics Division to introduce the system of environmental economic accounting and how it can support the post-2020 global biodiversity monitoring framework, including for the goals A and B and targets 9, 11, 14 and 19. So there's lots there. Julian, could you speak for about 10 minutes on this? Okay. I'll give you 2 minutes notice. And could you introduce yourself just a little before you go into the presentation?
Well, thank you, Philip. My name is Julian, and I'm part of the UNSD team working on the environmental economic accounting. So the purpose for my today presentation is to give an overview of the SEER and also the metadata for the SEER relevant headline indicators. I will give an overview presentation, and then my colleague from Netherlands and also EU, they will give an example to demonstrate the feasibility of compiling the indicators at the national level. After that, Bram is going to make a presentation to demonstrate the feasibility of using the global data to compile the indicator. Next slide, please. So the development of the system of environmental economic account is a response from the official statistical community to develop an official statistical framework to monitor sustainable development. The headline indicator like the GDP, they do not capture the vital contribution for the contribution from the environment to the economy and the social well-being. So the CA is aimed to filling this gap to integrate the information of the economy and the environment and showing their interrelationship, complementing the system of national account. Next one. So the CA consists of two parts. The first part, the CA Central Framework, this is looking the environment from the resource perspective, and it has developed for a while, and it has been adopted as an international statistical standard in 2013. So over the past few years, there's a significant advance to looking at the environment from the perspective of ecosystem. So for the CA ecosystem accounting, and this was also brought into the commission in last year, and chapter 1 to 7 related to the biophysical information about the extent and the condition and the service for the ecosystem is being adopted as an international statistical standard. For the second part on the valuation, the commission, they also recommend this is a principle and recommendation for the valuation of the ecosystem services and the asset to provide the monetary information. So as of the 2020, 89 countries has already implemented the CA Central Framework, and 35 countries has complied the CA ecosystem accounts. So this is also the information for the monitoring for the target 14, which talk about the number of countries implementing the system of environmental economic accounting. So this information is available and it is going to be done on an ongoing basis. Next one, please. And the importance for the CA and to engage in the CBD process is also recognized by the official statistical community. As mentioned by Alessandra, the STAC Commission, they also welcome the progress of the committee to work with the CBD Secretariat and the process to ensure that the CA is recognized as an underlying methodological basis. Next slide. And also in the political discussion for the CBD process and the substance, they will also recognize the importance for the CA and the value in aligning the national monitoring with the CA. And also the meeting, also they also will call for an establishment for the ad hoc technical expert group to advise on the further authorization on the monetary framework for the post-2020. So now CA is being proposed as the methodological basis for the several headline indicators in the latest framework. Next slide. So these are the indicators where the CA is relevant, which is the extent of the natural ecosystem, the goal and target related to the ecosystem service, which also include the benefit from the use of the wild species, and also the regulation of the air and the water quality and quantity, something about the mitigation service, and also there's also on target 19. This is related to the expenditure on the biodiversity. So now UNSD is being the proposed indicator custodian from Goal A, Goal B, Goal 9, Target 11, and Target 14. But we are also will contribute to the metadata for the Target 19. Next one. And with regard to the Goal A, is about the integrity of the ecosystem. So the key to monitor this goal is about the extent or the condition of the ecosystem, which assess the ecosystem with respect to its size and the characteristics, and also their changes over time. And this information is also important to underpin the supply of ecosystem on an ongoing basis. So the current indicator on the extent is essential to address the ecosystem integrity, which is central to Goal A. So we would also like to note that it is also important to reflect the ecosystem condition. So this is an area that requires some further work, but we also call for the importance to reflect the condition to monitor Goal A about the integrity. Next slide. And the underlying methodology, underlying classification that we are going to use to assess the extent of the ecosystem is based on the IUCN Global Ecosystem Typology, and this is also undergo the peer review process. And for the IUCN, So they form the basis in the class for these indicators. So the three upper level of the IUCN Global Ecosystem Typology, which is the RIM, functional biomes, and also the ecosystem functional group. They classify the ecosystem based on their functional characteristics, for example, on the structural rules, on the foundation species, water regime, climatic regime, or the food web structure. By using this systematic approach in classify ecosystem extent, you are able to identify which is considered as natural ecosystem and which is considered as a managed ecosystem. For example, if you look at the terrestrial RIM, T1 to T6, this will correspond to the, for the biome will correspond to the natural ecosystem. And for the T7 about the intensive land use system, this will correspond to the managed ecosystem. Next slide, please. And so in the headline indicators, in the definition, there's also some specific ecosystem that's being mentioned. So by using the IUCN Global Ecosystem Typology, you're able to map to define this ecosystem according to the biomes or the ecosystem functional group level by the typology. Next slide, please. Next, yeah, so through the use of this systematic approach to classify ecosystem extent, and then it is possible to build an extent account and then to monitor the change in size in terms of the addition and the reduction. And so the information here will be able to useful to monitor the change of the extent in a holistic manner. Next one. So short, we're also going to present example of how this information can be done at the national level. And with regard to for the GOBI, this is more related to the natural contribution to people. And so the proposed indicators is about the national environmental economic account of ecosystem services. And so related to GOBI is also for target 9 and 11. Next slide, please. Which is also about the benefit from the use of the wild species and also the regulation of the air quality, quantity, and also the mitigation of the extreme event. Next one, please. So here is essentially for these goals and targets which monitor the natural contribution to people and benefit, and this can be informed by the indicators from the physical and monetary ecosystem service flow account of the CEA. So in doing so, in the handbook, there's also a reference list of ecosystem, and this is giving a comprehensive list and description of the 27 ecosystem that's currently considered as important in the literature. So it's being grouped under the 3 categories for the provisioning service, the regulating and maintenance service, and the cultural services. So I would like to mention that when we are developing this reference list, actually this is through a wide consultation with the relevant stakeholders, including the EU, the custodian for the Common International Classification of Ecosystem, the US, the National Ecosystem Service Classification, and also the IP Best College. And through the consultation, we come up with this priority individual list of ecosystem that aim to provide a more exhaustive description of the important service. So if you're looking for these individual services, and there's quite a few services that's relevant to monitor target 9 and target 11. For example, for target 9 is related to the sustainable use of wild resources. So for the wild mass provisioning service, there's also an individual service that's related to this target, and also for the water supply. Next slide, please. Here, this is related to the relevant service that's under the regulating and the maintenance service, including the air filtration services, the landslide mitigation service, the water flow regulation service, and also the storm mitigation service and the flood control service. This is also relevant to the monitoring of target 11. And regarding for the wild use of species, for the pollination service, for the nursery population and the habitat maintenance services, this is related to the monitoring of target 9. Next slide, please. So in the SEER, they also provide a detailed description of the definition of these these services. So here for this summary table, I try to provide a generic overview of the metadata that is common across Goal A, Goal B, Target 9, and Target 11. The underlying methodology for Goal A is based on the ecosystem extent account for the SEER framework. For Goal B, Target 9 and Target 11 is based on the ecosystem service account framework from the SEER. In terms of the data collection method, the national data can be collected through the existing sources from the National Statistical Agency or the mapping agency at the national level. In the absence of the national data source and the regional and the global data sets, they can be collected to complement for the compilation for the national indicators through the global data platform and the mechanism that's being endorsed by the UN Stat Commission. So we also want to emphasize the importance that the global estimated data will be sent to the national authority for validation. In terms of accessibility, and for the SEER, this is the chapter 1 to 7 related to the extent and the service is being adopted as a standard by the UN Statistical Commission last year. And for the areas for the SEER Explorer is an open access application. So this is also open to all. So in this sense, it's undergo a robust review, and also the methodology and the information is available to all the general public. In terms of the global data source, the areas for SEER, which is a global data platform in compiled SEER account. So they are allowed to derive a basic ecosystem extent account for the period between 1992 to 2020 in the terrestrial, freshwater, and the coastal rim, and then using a multi-layer lookup approach. And as for the ecosystem services, and this is still an area that will require further development, but so this here, and my colleague Bram is going to talk into into more details. But the idea is you're also able to allow for the compilation for the ecosystem account through the existing ecosystem service modeling platform. For example, for the INVEST and for the SWOT model, that's for the water and the soil erosion service. In terms of the availability and the release calendar, the indicators, the global indicators is still in development, and also the global monitoring process for this indicator, and this is still under current development, and so the year where the first round of the data will be ready is still pending. Next one.
Yeah. Can I just ask you to finish in 2 minutes?
Okay, sure. So I think I'm almost coming to the end for the target 14. So this is about the status of the implementation. The information here is available now, and this is also the SDG indicators. So so this is a regular data collection process being collected by UNSD in terms of target 19, and this can be informed by the environmental protection expenditure account and from the SEER framework. And my colleague Shot is going to present it in more details. Next slide. So in terms of the underlying methodology, there's a guidelines on the biophysical modeling for ecosystem accounting, and also for the guidelines for the valuation. They form this is available for the country in terms of how they're able to use to compile the relevant ecosystem services and extend in monitoring these indicators. Next slide. And here, the proposed data collection will be, data will be collected by the national authority if the data is not available, and then this will be via the global data platform, and the global data will be sent to the national authority for validation. Next slide. And my colleague Bram is going to present more about using the global data platform for to compile the SEER account. This will facilitate the use to monitor this indicator at the global level. Next one. So here, this is the end of my presentation. So here we also just want to re-emphasize the role of the National Statistical Office and also the role of the SEER to monitor this indicator. And also effort is already being made to align the proposed NI indicators with the post-2020 framework. And guidelines and tools, and then through the presentation, is now available to facilitate the account compilation to improve the national data system for the monitoring for these indicators. So this is the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julian. That's great. Very exciting to see all of that work. And there's one question for you, Julian, in the chat, which if you'd like to look at later, and perhaps answer in written form, or we can take it again at the end. Great. So thank you. Can I have the next slide, please? That's great. So now I would like to invite Alessandra Lanotte from the European Commission's Joint Research Centre to introduce us some examples of ecosystem service indicators for the framework, and how this will be relating then to this work on national ecosystem accounting. Alessandra, if you'd like to introduce yourself and speak for 10 minutes.
Thank you, Philip. Yes, my name is Alessandra Lanotte and I work at the Joint Research Centre of the European Commission, specifically on natural capital accounting. Next slide, please. In line with the Julian presentation, I would like to show you some example of the indicators that can be built based on ecosystem service accounting. Next slide, please. The source of information for this indicator is the Integrated System for Natural Capital Accounting, this INCA project. The next click will show us that there was a partnership that used as a starting point the CIEA framework. The next click will also show us that Eurostat coordinated this partnership, where the JRC worked together with the DG Environment, DG Research and Innovation, and European Environment Agency. The next click will show us that we ended up generating supply and use table for 9 ecosystem services. And the next click will show the report that in chapter 7, make first attempts to set the indicators that could fit the international frameworks. Next slide, please. The conceptual framework underpinning INCA is quite simple. We start from an ecological side that is mapping what the ecosystem can provide independently, whether it is going to be used or not. The next click will show us that we also need to identify and map the socioeconomic side, that is economic activities, households that needs the interaction with the ecological side. And this will generate the match that is actually the ecosystem service actual flow that is going to fill the supply and use table. But the next click will also show us that a mismatch can occur when actually we have a demand for the services, but not ecosystem able to provide those services, or whether the services are used above their sustainability threshold. So the overuse of the services will eventually lead to ecosystem degradation. Next slide, please. However, when looking at the actual flow of ecosystem services, then they will fit the supply and use table. The next click will show us how the supply and use table can be structured, and next click can also show us how this was done in a pilot in case study for Europe for 9 ecosystem services. Then please click next. So, okay, thank you very much. So actually we have the service flow reported per year for each of the ecosystem service by each ecosystem type. This kind of information can help monitor the trend over time of each service, and actually is the basis for building indicator to address different targets. Next slide, please. We start with the target 9. Next slide, please. And we start with a service that is pollination, crop pollination. In the INCA framework, the ecological side is represented by a habitat suitable to host wild pollinator, and specifically bumblebees and wild bees, while the socioeconomic side is represented by the geographical distribution of pollinator-dependent crops. The next click will show us that we can actually find that there is an ecosystem service actual flow, so the match where the pollinator-dependent crop are covered by the ecosystem service. And the next click will show us that there are also an extent of crop of pollinator-dependent crops that are not covered by pollination services. So it is also important, and the next click, yes, thank you, is showing us that we can track the trend year, I mean, in a shorter period of terms that can be 6 years, and we can then detect a change, or also in a longer period of terms, that is the 12 years. And then we see we need to really interpret carefully these changes. We can also notice that the match, whenever we have a growing, a positive match, then we have a negative mismatch. And this is quite a good news. It means that the area, the extent of the area that is covered by pollination service is increasing, and the other way around. Next slide, please. The second service, okay, now then, of course, we have the tabular data are the results of a spatially explicit biophysical mapping. So we have the ecosystem service, the ecological side. The next click will show us the socioeconomic side, that is the distribution of pollinator-dependent crops. When these interaction provide a match, then we have the actual flow that is shown by the next click. And when we have a mismatch, then we can localize which are the areas that are not covered by the pollination services, as the next click will show us. Next slide, please. The second service relates to the habitat maintenance. And actually here we have two elements. One is the habitat suitability to support the presence of species. And the second aspect, the second element is the presence itself of species. So actually, when we have species supported by the habitat, this is quite a good news in terms of indicators. It's not a good news when we have the presence of species, but not the presence of habitat able to support those species. It means that these species can be at risk. And the next click will show us how this is structured with the indicator, and also next click, please. And also that actually we have, even if very slight, we are having a decrease in the habitats that support species, and an increase in the species at risk. Next slide, please. In terms of mapping, we can see the mapping of suitable habitats. This is what the next click will show us. And the presence also of species hotspots. This is what the next click will show us. The spatial relationship between these two elements will generate, next click, please. No, please go back, thank you. Will generate the biophysical assessment that whenever you see the red color, it means this is where we have the species, but not the habitats. Where you see the green color, it means that we have both habitat and species. So it can be quite a powerful indicator. Next slide, please. Now we are going to consider another couple of ecosystem services that that will fit the target 11. Next slide, please. The first one is the soil erosion control services. Actually, what we are looking here is where vegetation is needed to control erosion, because soil erosion undermines the material substrate needed to grow crops and can decrease soil fertility, which eventually affect agricultural production. So next click is showing us basically where we have the match, meaning that the soil retention is support, the vegetation is controlling soil erosion. Next click, please. And we can also find out where this is not happening. So vegetation is not controlling soil erosion. Next click. And we can see, and the next click will show us whether when we consider over the 12 years, we have quite a stable situation in terms of the provision of the soil and a decrease of soil erosion. That could be a message, a critical message to take into consideration. Next slide, please. Here we can have first the ecological side, the socioeconomic side. Then the next click that shows us which are the areas that are at risk of soil erosion, when then their interaction will generate the ecosystem, the soil erosion natural flow. Next click, please. And where we have the mismatch, which is the next click, we can also see where are the areas that are more exposed to the risk of soil erosion. Next slide, please. Where we can find the last ecosystem service that for which an example is provided. That is flood mitigation services. In this case, basically, we are mapping on the ecological side the service providing area, basically. And these areas, this ecosystem are mitigating the risk of flood for economic assets that can be agricultural fields, infrastructure, industrial site, and so on, and also human settlements that are mostly located in floodplains. So when we see here, we have 2006 and 2012 as pilot years, and we can see the next click can show us that we have a decrease in the provision of this service. I mean, this actually is it's quite critical in this case, especially for some ecosystem services, to carefully understand the role played by the ecological side and the socioeconomic demand. Next click, and also the next one, please.
Alessandra, can I ask, can you finish in 2 minutes, please?
Yes, it's I've finished actually. It's only please. Next slide. I just show you the map that is generating actually, because it's a spatial biophysical assessment that is generating all this data. So we have the ecological side, so the service providing area. Next click will show us the socioeconomic side, and their interaction will generate the actual flow. So the socioeconomic, the economic asset and human settlement that actually are protected by ecosystem from the risk of flooding. And the next click will show us which are the economic asset and human settlement that are not protected by ecosystem from the risk of flooding. Next slide, please. In thanking you for your patience, actually, I also would like to take a few more seconds to officially mention all the members of the team who really work hard to generate all these ecosystem service accounts, mapping and assessment. I would like to thank Sara Vallesilio, Chiara Polce, Grazia Zulian, Ioana Grammatikopoulou, Mayra Zubaran, and I also would like to thank our former team leader, Joachim Mas, who made all this possible. Thank you very much for your attention. And if you have any question, please do not hesitate to contact us.
Great, thank you very much, Alessandra. Good. Can we have the next slide, please? So I would now like to ask Sjoerd Schenau from Statistics Netherlands to give us another example of how to calculate the extent of selected and natural modified ecosystems, and relating that to public expenditure and private expenditure on conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity and ecosystems. And if you could do that in 10 minutes, Sjoerd, that would be great. Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Philip. Well, my name is Sjoerd Schenau. I'm the project leader of the Dutch Environmental Council Statistics Netherlands, and it's my pleasure today to introduce to you two indicators. First, on the extent of selected natural modified ecosystems, and the next one is on public expenditure and private expenditure on conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity in ecosystems. Both of these indicators can be derived from SIA, and I will illustrate this with data from the Netherlands. Next slide, please. So the first indicator is on the extent of selected natural and modified ecosystems. Well, this indicator can be derived from the extent accounts of the SIA ecosystem accounts. In fact, the extent account is the starting point of the ecosystem accounting, as Julian also in his presentation already mentioned. Basically, the extent account records the areas of different ecosystems and changes in these areas. And it's important to mention that, well, the extent accounts has an exhaustive coverage. So in principle, it covers the area of the whole of a certain country. So it covers all terrestrial, freshwater, coastal, and marine areas. And also it's mutually exclusive, so it covers everything. Next slide, please. Well, the general approach for compiling the extent accounts is, of course, first you need maps of your ecosystems. For these, you can use all kinds of local data sources and maps. Very important is that you have an ecosystem type classification, and in principle all countries are encouraged to develop their own ecosystem type classification that is fit for policy uses on a national level. However, these national ecosystem type classifications can be aligned to the IUCN global ecosystem typology, as Julian also has introduced, and this of course ensures that you have international comparability of your accounts and also of your indicators. Once you have your maps of your ecosystems, you can compile the extent account, which basically shows you the different areas of these ecosystems and how they change over time. And then you can derive these indicators. Next slide, please. To illustrate this for the Netherlands, we've also developed our own ecosystem type classification for the Netherlands, and we developed a new map that was constructed with a clear focus on ecology and ecosystem services, and also that it's fully compliant with the CAEA guidelines and the IUCN global ecosystem typology. You see this classification on the right. It's quite extensive. We have identified 49 different ecosystem types, and it covers both natural, semi-natural ecosystems, but also agriculture and built-up areas. It's also a nested classification. We have a classification for a publication level, but also more detailed ecosystem types. For example, for forest, we have 4 different forest types that are also very important when we look at data for the national level. Next slide, please. On the right, you see the map for the Netherlands, the latest map we have for 2018. Well, how was this map developed? To illustrate this, I will tell you a little bit about the process for compiling this map. Well, basically what we did, we have available different maps, and we combine them to get the best representation of ecosystems. The starting point is a digital topographic map, which contains information about the baseline geometry, but also land cover, land use. Then we added information on the so-called nature management types, which are the basis for our national biodiversity policy. We also added information about agriculture, namely the agricultural parcel registry, and also information about public green for urban areas, but also some specific topic maps, for example, for salt marshes. When we combine all these different maps, we get the right ecosystem type classification and also the map for different years. Next slide, please. So from these maps, which we now have available for several years, we can easily derive the extent account for the Netherlands, which is shown here. And you see in the rows at an aggregated level are different ecosystem types, main ecosystem types. And in the columns, you see the extent, but also how it changes over time. So the increases, decreases, and the next change. For example, to the left, you see the extent of 2013, and to the right, the extent of 2018. And you can see how the extent of the different ecosystem types has changed over time. Next slide, please. So from this, we can easily derive the indicators that we need. So for example, here you see the extent of ecosystem types in 2018. And well, for the Netherlands, which is a very densely populated country, you see there's a lot of extent goes to grassland, cropland, but also built-up areas. And we have a limited number of natural and semi-natural ecosystems, which are quite under threat. That's also important why we have to closely monitor it for the Netherlands. Next slide, please. But also very important, of course, how this changes over time. And here you see the changes in ecosystem extent between 2013 and 2018. For example, you can see that the public green areas in cities has increased. Also, the wetland area has increased. However, when we look at forest, for example, that area has decreased. And this is, of course, very important information, particularly also for our national policymakers to see what is happening with our ecosystems. Next slide, please. Of course, these were indicators on a national level. We can also look in more detail on the regional and local level. Here you see two maps in which at first glow look very identical, but when you look into detail, you can see what's really going on. So next click, please. So what we, for example, did is that we looked at the changes in forest ecosystems, which can be derived easily from the ecosystem type map. What you see here is areas, well, red areas where the forest areas has decreased. In green, you show areas where the forest area has increased. So this is very important information also for on a local level. Next two clicks, please. Next, yes, next. And here we have some example. When you look really at a close level, you can see actually what's happening. For example, in this area, you see that reforestation has gone on. Grassland has been converted to a forest area. Next slide, please. Now I come to the second indicator that I would like to illustrate, which is public expenditure and private expenditure on conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity and ecosystems. Well, this indicator in principle can be derived from the CS Central Framework, or more specifically, the Environmental Protection Expenditure Accounts, the EPEA. The EPEA is a statistical framework for monetary activities and related transactions. And in principle, it provides data for government, corporation, and households. And also it incorporates data on different kinds of transactions. Important to note is that it's based and also fully consistent with a system of national accounts, the SNA, which means that also the data can directly be compared with all kinds of macroeconomic indicators, for example, GDP. A lot of different countries compile the environmental protection expenditure accounts, and in Europe, there's a legal base for the EPA, which means that all European countries annually have to compile this data and send this data to Eurostat. Next slide, please. When we look at the transactions that we are looking for on the expenditure, we apply the so-called classification of environmental activities. Basically, what we do, we look at the transactions that are recorded in the system of national account, but also in business statistics, and to identify the environmental transactions. And then we classify it according to this classification. And when you look at this classification, there are a lot of different classes, for example, for wastewater, waste management, but also number 6 is about the protection of biodiversity and landscapes. And that comes very closely to the indicator we are looking for. Next slide, please. So in principle, the EPA covers a lot of different transactions. In principle, it covers expenditure on environmental protection products by resident units, which are all the environmental protection products that are considered that prevent, reduce, or eliminate environmental pressures. And experience shows often these are services. So when we look at the domain we are looking for today, so biodiversity protection, landscape protection, we look at specific services, management services in that area. In addition, it's also included is expenditure related to the production of environmental protection products, including gross capital formation. And this, in this regard, also includes, for example, land acquisitions for protection of ecosystems. Finally, it also includes transactions relating to the financing of environmental protection expenditure. And this shows you who's actually financing this expenditure. For example, households or the government, and that aspect is also included there. So in principle, the indicator we're looking for, if we add A and B from here, we get the indicator we have to compile. Next slide, please.
So I'm ask you to finish up in a minute,
yes.
Just so we have time for the next presenter and questions.
Yes, I have 2 more slides, so I will finish very quickly. Just some examples from data from the Netherlands. This is in principle the indicator derived from our national EPA. What we show here is, as you can see, for the last 10 years, public expenditure has gone up, whereas private expenditure has remained more or less constant. It has even gone a little down. And next slide, please. And also an important indicator is gross fixed capital formation, which in this case is primarily the acquisition of land for protection. And here you can see that it goes up and goes down. It has a more irregular pattern. And with that, I come to the end of my presentation. Thank you for your attention. And if there are any questions, please let me know. Back to you, Philip.
Thank you, Sjoerd. It's great to see that level of detail and work in the Netherlands. Thank you. So can we have the next slide, please? And I would like to invite Bram Edens from UN26 Division to introduce Areas for CA Explorer, and we will include a little video in this one.
Yeah, correct. And this will be only very short presentation. So hello everybody. So my name is Bram Edens. I'm a senior statistician with the UN Stats Division here in New York. So to support SIA implementation, we have developed a tool called the Areas for SIA Explorer together with BC3. So that's the Basque Center for Climate Change. So essentially, the Areas for SIA Explorer uses global data and models to generate a basic set of ecosystem accounts, and it enables compilation anywhere on Earth. So a user can choose his or her country, or a subnational area in the country, or a specific watershed to generate these ecosystem accounts that we have heard about, such as ecosystem extent accounts or ecosystem services accounts. So the Explorer is powered by artificial intelligence, specifically machine reasoning, and that uses it to construct what is considered the best available model for the area and also the time series specified by the user and the variables selected. So Areas has around 150 global data layers, and many of them are based on Earth observation data. So you can think of here of land cover, elevation data, precipitation, and so on. So this tool may be particularly relevant for countries that may have low data availability or low technical expertise with GIS or ecosystem service modeling. The whole idea with the Areas for SIA Explorer is that you can jumpstart your accounts compilation from global data sources, but then you can gradually improve them over time using national data when they become available. And it's a fully transparent tool, so all the metadata are there, all the results can be downloaded, tables, maps, and so on. And I've put also here the link for those of you who would like to try it out and you have more information. So if you can, we have now a short 2-minute video that I think gives you the flavor of what it looks like. So please play the video. So just to finish off here, so if you can go to the next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yes, so specifically pertaining to goal A, the current IS foresee content when it comes to ecosystem extent, that it maps 29 different ecosystem types based on the IUCN GET typology and approach that we've heard about already, by combining what Julian described as this multi-dimensional lookup table. And it covers a time span of 1992 to 2019. And it generates essentially an ecosystem extent, what we call an asset account, but also change matrices. So we currently have around 29 ecosystem types there as default, but we're rapidly expanding to distinguish, I think, between 50 or 60 different ecosystem types. And then depending also on of course, countries' own maps and their possibility to integrate it with IS, you can have different levels of disaggregation. Next slide, please. Specifically regarding goal B, currently IS for SIA has 5 different ecosystem services indicator included. All in physical terms, but some of them also in monetary terms. But we are rapidly expanding also to include, for instance, hydrological indicators. So, okay, so that's, I think, all I had to say. Thank you so much. Back to you, Philip.
Great, thank you. Perhaps you could post a link in the chat to this report. Great, okay. So we've got 10 minutes or so left for questions and answers and discussion, and then at 25 past, I'm going to invite the CBD Secretariat, hopefully Gillian Campbell, who's still with us, to be able to just give a few closing remarks. And I'd like to ask the first question, and perhaps if we can see the different presenters, then we've seen excellent presentations on a lot of what's available in Europe and being developed, which obviously depends on the data sets that are available for that. The last presentation on ARIES was partly helping to address this question of, though, for other parts of the world where they may not have such extensive availability of data on ecosystems and ecosystem services, and also perhaps technical capacity amongst government agencies and stats offices for producing this information. Would one or more of our presenters like to comment on how to help other parts of the world be able to have the data and indicators and capacity for doing this?
Yeah, maybe I can start to answer this question. So that's why, at the international level, we also call for the greater capacity development and the training effort to improve the country capacity in compiling this account. And so we are also all trying to develop the compilation guidance and offer the training in order to support the country in the globe to further implement this ecosystem accounting. So currently there's a global implementation strategy that's being developed that include all this training and the capacity. So I think this is an area that we need further maybe resources in order to support the work. But I just want to emphasize this ongoing effort in this area to support country in this development.
Sorry, would anybody else like to speak to that? No? Okay, thank you. We have another question being asked. How stable are the SIA indicators presented here to changes in methodology and data availability? Would Julian or Alessandra Alfieri perhaps like to comment on that as to how much are there likely to be changes in the methodology and data availability of these SIA indicators? How likely are the indicators to change?
Well, I mean, as we're going into Geneva this month at the SAPSTA, the indicators will be heavily discussed. I would expect that parties have now had time to really consider the indicators since the first part of SAPSTA a year ago. And based on the submissions that I've seen from, different parties who have shared views on the post-2020 process, and partners also have been sharing views on the post-2020 process, which are all posted on the website. I would say that there are going to be some changes probably proposed by parties. There's also changes that are being discussed to the goal and target language themselves, which would, of course, affect the indicators. So my own view is that there will be some changes. However, in terms of the indicators that we've been hearing about today and the need to align with the UN Statistical Commission and the people working in statistics, I think that is something that the parties have recognized across the board. And so I wouldn't expect for the discussion on the SIA to disappear, but I do think there will be some changes in the formulation of the monitoring framework. Thanks.
Thank you, Julia. Thank you from the Secretary.
And just to add, in terms of what we are doing as part of the SCA communities, we are working towards developing a grid method on how actually to compile this data, what would be the appropriate data sources at the global level, at the national level. And this is something that we have now created some subgroups that are actually looking into the details of this, looking at the global data sets that are available that we can leverage on, as well as national data sets, and doing some basically testing and experimentation in countries.
Great, thank you. Those are the main questions I have. That something that I would also like to know a bit more about is, as you said, Alessandra Alfieri, at the beginning, how the role of statistics agencies, national statistics agencies, is perhaps changing in terms of being more stewards of this work rather than actually calculating it themselves. And for helping countries with less capacity to have these indicators and information, if the Statistics Office is a steward for this work, then it requires obviously other agencies or government agencies, or perhaps academia or non-government organizations in the country, to be taking up this work of producing ecosystem accounts and ecosystem service accounts, and that is supporting the implementation of the Convention on Biodiversity and the new biodiversity framework. Could you perhaps say a bit about how you see that might be supported and developed in terms of these roles of the different agencies in terms of having this information that we need?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think working already in a geospatial or in a spatially explicit framework is not something that many statistical offices have a lot of experiences. They're increasingly gaining these experiences and using, let's say, alternative data sources like Earth observation and so on. So, and for this, they need to also work very closely with other agencies. And when we are talking about the environment space in particular, the information is quite dispersed in different agencies. So they have actually followed this model also in the context of the SDG, because the SDG also cover many areas that the statistical offices does not have all the information that is needed. So, and the role of the statistical office is really bringing together these different agencies and trying to basically, I would say, institutionalize the compilation of these accounts using agreed methods and agreed definitions. I mean, just by way of example, we are working in Senegal, for example, to compile land cover and then ecosystem extent accounts. And I think that what we have done we started with areas for SCEA. Of course, they have also their own data, and the National Statistical Office is working very closely now with the mapping agency to try to basically come up with a series of maps over time that would provide this information on land cover and eventually on ecosystem extent accounts. And this goes much further than what the National Statistical Office usually does. So, I mean, it is a good, I would say it's a good incentive for National Statistical Office to kind of get out of their comfort zone and working with other agencies and understanding what is out there and how to bring it together and integrate it with the statistical system.
Great, thank you very much, Alessandra. I just have one question for Bram, and then I'll ask Gillian if she can give some concluding remarks. So we have a question posted here. Thanks for presenting the areas of information. Could you speak to the feasibility or readiness of the condition account methodology of SEA to complement the extent indicator? Areas assist with this.
Sure, yeah, no, happy to. So ARIES for SEA currently has a condition account, but it's focused around forest ecosystem types. So it has 6 different variables that can be measured and then also used to compile a condition account. So we are working to expand that also towards different ecosystem types. In the CIEA itself, there's, I think, for the various ecosystem types, there are already suggested variables that are recommended for the condition accounts. But as Alessandra was mentioning, we are now working also with these groups to further give more precision and direction in terms of the variables and the methods to use. So I would say it's ongoing work. But I think that definitely would also allow, let's say, in the medium term, to move towards, let's say, indicators that provide a condition-weighted extent to further proxy this notion of ecosystem integrity. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Bram. Okay, thank you. Gillian, if you're with us, I'm not sure whether I can see Gillian still. No, I think Gillian had poor internet quality, so she's not able to be with us. We did hear from Gillian a few minutes ago, though. I don't know whether I could ask a CTO at this point, but it's Benita's Substar chair, whether you might be willing just to say a few words, concluding comments on from today.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to see the different examples on indicators. We have a big task in our deliberations in Substar on this point for the monitoring framework. We can see how there is already a lot of work being done through the statistical information, including national statistical offices that can help to do these global systems and based also on national data and how this can be integrated in the framework, in particular for defining and agreeing headline indicators on the different goals and targets. I do thank you very much to the experts for sharing their experience, and I hope this can inspire delegates to agree some reasonable, functional, and useful framework. And looking forward to see you in Geneva, to some of you. Thank you very much. And don't forget that still another webinar for tomorrow to finish the cycle in preparation for our meetings. Thank you very much to all the experts for sharing your experience. Bye-bye and good luck.
Thank you very much, Ezekiel. Thank you, everybody. Yes, thank you again to all the speakers for your excellent presentations and expertise and contribution to this subject. It's very exciting to see the advances. Compared to 10 years ago, there's a transformation in terms of what's possible and what's coming up. And I think it's exciting to see how there's the challenge between ambitious targets and new subjects, creating the development of new indicators and analysis, and then that work equally feeding into the ability to measure the monitoring framework and report on it. So thank you very much again, everybody. As Ezekiel said, we're back again tomorrow for the last part of our webinar, and we look forward to hopefully seeing as many of you then. Thank you, everybody. Stay safe. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.